In 1 Thessalonians 2, starting in verse 17 and going through chapter 3 and verse 13, is a section dealing with Paul's concern and prayer for the Thessalonians. And he begins in verses 17 through verse 20 with Paul's concern for them. And in verse 17 and 18, he wished to see them. Brother Raymond Kelsey, in his commentary, mentions that it's possible that there were some critics in Thessalonica who said that Paul never really intended to return, and would even argue his continued absence showed that. He had really just moved on and forgotten them. Paul is showing in these verses the absurdity of such. He uses that term brethren, for we brethren, or but we brethren. They were brothers in Christ, and it is that term of endearment that Paul uses numerous times throughout this book. He uses that term being taken. It comes from a root word which we get orphans from. And then there's a prefix which means from. The meaning of being orphaned is to be bereft of parents, or the benefit of parents. Children who had their parents died, or in some cases, nowadays more so, parents that cannot take care of them. So Paul is saying it's as if our family has been torn apart by the persecution that has been brought against us. And he hated to leave them as babes in Christ. So he says that we, brethren, being taken from you for a short time in presence. Literally, it is for a season of an hour, showing how short of time that he's dealing with. It is an intensified form of what would normally be found, showing, again, the intensity that he has toward them, and we're being separated for a short time in relationship to the intensity of that short time. It could, especially from the standpoint of what happened at Thessalonica, that he was chased out of the city. So it could be that as well, the suddenness of it. The word itself does not indicate that as much as the shortness of it, the time frame, but it could mean the suddenness of it as well, or have application to it. He mentions his feelings for them for a short time in presence. Presence is a word which literally means here face. That's the way it's translated later on in this verse, the more abundantly to see your face with great desire. Well, here, he's been taken from their face for a short time, or for a short time according to face. The idea is they're no longer seeing each other face to face. With loved ones. Even with the technologies that we have today, it's still not like being face to face, is it? Mm-hmm. Far different than being on FaceTime or Messenger, Facebook, seeing them or anything like that. I will mention this in talking to a preacher friend who was arguing that doing online services was basically being there in person. You're in one place. It's all online. I use this argument, actually. Is it the same thing when you see your grandkids online or as it is when you see them in person? Oh, no. And then I knew that he had gone to the doctor, so I used that one. Did your doctor put that stethoscope on your heart and lungs and listen? No. And then added, and I bet the doctor charged the same amount for that online visit. No, it's a lot cheaper. Well, there's a reason for that. There's a difference. So you can do all of that online, stuff and that you want to, but it's not the same as being face to face. Of course, they didn't have all of that then, but they did have letters and could send people, but it still wasn't the same when Paul writes a letter to them as him being there in person. And that's what he's talking about. I'm not here in person with you. I'm not face to face with you. But just like families that are separated that get online and see each other, the heart is still there, isn't it? Doesn't change the feelings that we have for them. And so that's why it mentions not in heart. I'm not there with you face to face, but my heart, my affections are there with you. Ellingworth and Nida stated that in Hebrew thinking, the heart was considered to be the seat of the intellect and the center of the whole personality, not primarily the seat of emotions. And if you think about the intellect, the center of the personality, not necessarily the emotions, though, in relationship to the terms that are using here, or that Paul is using here. So, his entire being, to a great extent, he's saying, my entire being is with you. My emotions, yes, that's involved there. The intellect, my personality, it still remained with you, even though we're not there physically one with the other. With Paul, it was not out of sight, out of mind. That might have been what some of these that were accusing or making these accusations against Paul might have been saying. Well, he's gone and you're out of mind now. You're out of sight, out of mind. But anyone who has love for somebody, even though they might be out of sight for a while, doesn't mean that they're out of mind, does it? So Paul sought to see them again, had great desire. We do not know what all Paul did to get back to see them again. But as Brother Don Walker put it, but do not confuse his lack of success with a lack of desire or attempt. That's a good way to put it. Simply because he was not successful does not mean that he didn't attempt it and that he did not have the desire to be there, to go back to see them. He had that desire. What attempts he might have made, we don't know. Notice this phrase at the last, with great desire. Desire is from the Greek word epithumia. Desire is a good way in which it's translated when it's used in a good sense. Can anybody guess what it's translated in when it's used in a negative way? Can you guess what the word is translated into our English when it's used in a negative way? Lust. Yeah, lust. That's what it is. It just depends on if the lust, the desire, is directed toward good or toward evil. The desire, the lust, is there. We have to make sure that it's not in an evil way, but that it's in a good way. But you'll see the two ways, and that's context. When they get to this word, should they translate it the same way every time? No. Because context would show one of them's a negative way and one of them, the other one's a positive way.
Well, like the word cleave.
Yeah, our English word cleave. You cleave something and you separate it. Cleave can also have that idea of two are joined together in marriage. He has a meat cleaver, the butcher does, yeah. And you just hope that he cleaves the right thing and not a finger along with it. There's a lot of words like that can be used one way or the other way. And the translators, to help us understand, use lust or desire. But it's the same word. So in verse 18, wherefore we would have come unto you, even I, Paul, once and again, but Satan hindered us. There's a lot in this. But again, we see Paul's desire. If there's these who are advocating there that, well, Paul really didn't care anything about you, he's gone, he doesn't think about you anymore, he's not really planning on coming back, left you on your own. Here he clearly states, I would have come to you. His desire was to come to them. But Satan put obstacles in his way, so he could not do it. Paul uses an emphatic when he talks about he himself wanted to come to them. if you notice, just go back into the context and read the second chapter. How many times he's talking about we? But now then he changes it, even I, Paul. Even in this 18th verse. Wherefore we would have come unto you, but Satan hindered us. But then right in the middle of that, even I, Paul. So while Paul and his companions, because Paul did have companions as he went on these preaching tours, there's those companions, and he's saying all of us would have, but even all of us would have, I have that special desire. Me, myself. I believe that's a little bit later, but yes, it might have been. That's more in the second mission, or the third journey. And yes, it was, while this would have been more the second journey. And at that third journey, yes, he made sure that even someone from those congregations that donated money, that he was trying to get that congregation to send someone with him and his group. There's the principle, provide things honest in the sight of all men. There would have been, by usage of that, no way in which anyone could accuse him of taking any of the money. Any embezzlement, anything like that, stealing it, using it for some other purpose. He wasn't going to be a Judas. And with his company that he had, is that, Michael, you need to get online and buy some more microphones and wires. I'll tell you, a little bitty wire that's only a few feet long and getting charged $30 for it, that was a few years ago. Might be more now. That just doesn't set well with me, but that's another story. With all of those that were around him, and then asking congregations, you send someone with me. He was doing that which he wrote in Romans 12, provide things honest in the sight of all men. Timothy was on this trip, yes. Silas would have been there. At times Luke. Luke was with him quite often, but not always. But I was trying to think of some others that were with him, but I think Titus was at times. Of course, during the first journey, Barnabas. So there were quite a few he had traveling with him. He had an entourage, as we would put it. He's saying we would all like to have come to you. But me especially, he's putting himself particularly forward in this, even I, Paul. And notice that it's not just once, but once and again. In other words, repeated attempts in which I wanted to come to you. And Satan hindered us. Hindered as far as what Satan had done, is a Greek word that is used of a road which was blocked to stop an expedition on a march. Some of you, being in the military, have marched certain places on roads, no doubt, many times. This would be putting something up to block that march, to prevent you from going past there. Of course, in the military, you're trained to knock it down and go on anyway, right? But the idea of hindering is that obstacle that has been placed there to prevent you from going. A.T. Robertson, in his commentary, writes that Milligan quotes papyrus example of 3rd century B.C., verb used to cut in a road to make a road impassable. Right? So Paul charges Satan with cutting into his path, end quote. Satan is cutting into his path. We've all seen roads that have the roadblock, don't go past this because the road has been damaged. He's saying Satan's damaging the road and putting that blockade up so you can't go beyond it. Notice the term Satan, and now I want to make some comments about this. What's the meaning of the term Satan? Its actual meaning. He is the devil, but that's not the meaning of it, the term Satan. Adversary. He is an adversary. Now then, notice the term here. Why did he use Satan hindered us? Why didn't he say the devil hindered us? Well, because he is showing Satan is an adversary in this. Your adversary of the devil. And then identifies him as the devil, your adversary of the devil, as a roaring lion walking about seeking whom he may devour. But an adversary, in particular, stresses the devil's role as the adversary of God and God's people. He's our adversary. He's our enemy in that sense. Now then, how did Satan hinder them from returning to the Thessalonians? Well, the answer is, in reality, we don't know. We know a lot of things happen. We know the persecution that took place. We know the needs of other places to proclaim the gospel. Satan hindered this. How? We don't know, but we know that he did. But there is an interesting idea, at least. Turn back to Acts 17. And look at starting at verse 5. But the Jews which believed not, moved with envy, took unto them certain lewd fellows of the baser sort, and gathered a company, and set all the city in an uproar, and assaulted the house of Jason, and sought to bring them out to the people. And when they found them not, they drew Jason and certain brethren unto the rulers of the city, crying, These that have turned the world upside down are come hither also, whom Jason hath received. And these all do contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, one Jesus. And they troubled the people, and the rulers, of the city, when they heard these things. Now notice this last phrase. And when they had taken security of Jason and the others, they let them go. What is taking security? No, not a hostage. Well, they let them go, but so it wasn't that type of an arrest or taking them hostage or anything like that.
Like a payment,
Pretty much payment. A security bond, we might put it. Why would they be taking a security bond from Jason? They're talking about now Paul and Silas and these that are with him that have turned the world upside down and they're causing trouble in the city. We're going to take some money from Jason. Why would they do that? Well, Jason had welcomed them in his house, but still, why take money from him? To punish him? Maybe. At least partially. No doubt that was entered into it. But it might also say, you don't let them come back. Or you'll lose your money. It may be in a roundabout way it's a hostage. You're taking the money as the hostage in that situation. It might be that if they come back, yeah, you're going to have to pay more money. This is what you're being charged with now. We'll charge them more money if they come back. Could. It doesn't seem consistent with what we read, because what happens after this? Yeah. Well, they immediately sent Paul away. I was getting confused with the 16th chapter, but they immediately send Paul away. So it could be that they're taking money from Jason to make sure that he gets rid of them. But the idea of security is basically a security bond. A bond to ensure that, I think possibly that they don't come back. maybe that's part of the way in which Satan hindered us from returning. I mean, it's at least an interesting thought that here they've taken security of Jason, let him go. They send Jason out, or Paul out of the city, and now then Paul is Satan's hindering us. One thing we learn is that when wicked do things to prevent or hinder the spread of the gospel and hinder God's messengers, they are working under Satan's banner. If this is the case, that taking a security of Jason is basically saying this is to make sure that they stay out of the city.
Could that be the city some away by night? Maybe that was the sheriff, and I'd be sure to get out.
It could be. Yeah, absolutely. But it would also be the same thing in keeping them out. Don't let them return. But yes, get them out and keep them out. Would include both, I would say. But the rulers, in taking that security from Jason, in this case, were working under Satan's banner. They were doing Satan's bidding. Anytime anyone tries to prevent the spread of the gospel, to hinder those who are preaching the gospel, they are doing Satan's work. We don't generally think of it that way, but that's the situation.
Paul always turned it around, then he went somewhere else, preached the gospel.
He continued to preach the gospel. He went somewhere else to do it. But his desire, as we are seeing here, was to go back to Thessalonica to see the brethren there. And he's saying Satan's hindering us. Now then, what all he did, we don't know. Let me ask a question, though. We've seen Paul has made the statement, I had the desire to come and see you face to face. Satan is hindering us. Therefore, we cannot come and see you face to face. Now, that's the situation. Did Paul and his companions sin in not going anyway? In allowing Satan to continue to prevent them from doing what he says they want to do?
That could have been more personal desire than anything. That wouldn't be any kind of sin.
You're right. It would not be any type of sin. They were not committing sin, even though it was Satan that was hindering them. Satan is active today. He might prevent us from doing something, and the key to it there is that we want to do. Because this was Paul and his companions' desire. It was not God saying, you go there anyway. He had the desire to go, but Satan hindered him, okay? It wasn't sin, but the thing is, Paul continued to preach the gospel. He just went elsewhere to do it. Satan could not have hindered him from preaching the gospel. Go back to Acts 16th chapter, and he's thrown in jail. And what's he doing in jail? He ends up preaching the gospel. And you have the conversion of the Philippian jailer. So Satan, no matter what he would do, was not going to prevent Paul from preaching the gospel, but there are certain things that we might want right in and of themselves. And let me ask the question, would it have been sinful for Paul to go back to the Thessalonians? Well, obviously not. He was not under obligation to do it, but he had the desire to do it. Would not have been sinful. Satan prevented it. So Paul continued to preach the gospel.
Jesus had warned him that this is going to happen to you. He would not select you. Go into the Gentiles, this is what will happen.
You're going to be facing opposition the whole time. And that's the key. That's going to be the situation with anyone who's preaching the gospel. There's going to be opposition. Shouldn't be surprised about it. Preach the gospel anyway. Well, Satan's preventing me from going here. Okay, preach the gospel someplace else. There have been brethren who have had the desire to go to certain places and locations which they just simply could not go to preach the gospel.
Brother Wright run into that same thing. He didn't have a right passport. When he got sick, he heard some of these people talking about how they could get into Singapore somewhere and get a Canadian passport. First thing he did was call a brother and ask him and said, "Now you're going over here." And they said, "He'll be there because he had a
Canadian passport. I was trying to think the names of all those. I was thinking that he was trying to get into China, and the one that was a Canadian, I don't remember his name just offhand. I remember it if somebody said it, but
he was surprised. I'm going to China.
all of a sudden get a call, "You're going to China." What if I don't want to go? "You're going to China." But Brother Rice, even though he wanted to go there, he could not. What was that, Satan hindering you? Yes, in that sense. And in the same sense that Paul was being hindered to go back to the Thessalonica. And what did Paul do? He continued to preach the gospel and sends them this letter. Satan, though, we need to realize he is working in the world still. And even as God is working in the world, God has greater authority than what Satan does. But Satan does have certain powers that he can use to try to prevent people from doing right. He cannot overcome their will. In other words, force them to do something or not to do something. He can't do that, even as God will not do that. Man is still left with his free moral agency, his ability to choose. But Satan's going to do everything within his power to stop the forces of right. When Satan hinders us in one area, just go to a different area and continue to do what's right, as Paul did here. Satan hindered him from coming to Thessalonica. Paul goes somewhere else to preach the gospel. And instead of getting into verse 19 and 20, I thought I would add this. Paul had a desire to do one thing, right? In this, that we're discussing at least, to go back to Thessalonica. What if Paul had decided, I would rather go over here? That's free moral choice. We can make decisions that are right within themselves. We can make decisions that, if we had made a different decision, would have been right, but this one's right as well. That's where we think, what is best? What would be best in this situation? I'll use an illustration that I used in next month's editorial for Defender. Paul and Barnabas in Acts 15th chapter get into a really strong disagreement over whether to take John Mark with them. Paul said, I don't think it's good to. Barnabas said, we're going to take him. Paul said, no, we're not. And it went back and forth, and so they basically separated from each other. Paul's decision in saying, no, we're not going to take him, was not sinful. Barnabas' decision, yes, we are going to take him, was not sinful. Paul was looking at what is best in this situation. Barnabas was looking at what is best in this situation. They disagreed as to what is best. Neither one of them were sinful, but what's best? It turns out that the situation ended up being Barnabas takes Mark, and that helps Mark out. Strengthens him so that later on Paul could say that he's profitable to me. But when you have those types of situations within a local congregation, who makes the decisions? The elders make the decisions in that type of a situation. Either decision that they might make is right in the sense that it is not sinful, but they're using their judgment as to what is best for the congregation. And in those decisions then, every member, including every other elder, or every elder individually, must submit to the decision of the eldership. So that's just an added part. So we'll start with verse 19, Lord willing, next time.